Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers TV. It is Friday, December 14th. I'm Jerry Roberts, and we are joined by our all-star panel of top local journalists, Gwyn Lurie, editor-in-chief of the Montecito Journal, Josh Molina, politics and policy writer for Newshawk, and Ryan P. Cruz, staff writer for The Independent. Thank you all for coming. Big story this week. We talked last week about the students walking out at Dos Pueblos High on behalf of their teachers, and this has now spread to the other two high schools. Josh, what's going on? They seem pretty big protests as well. Was everybody just trying to get out of class?
Well, my legs are sore. That's what's going on because anyone who's ever covered a parade or protest or march or rally, it is work. And these students, we're talking about 800 at San Marcos. I heard like 1,000 at Santa Barbara High. I mean, it's hard to get an estimate unless you go to the school and find out how many people are absent. But even then, several thousand students walking off campus at San Marcos and Santa Barbara High this week. They are supporting their teachers, and they are also feeling the impact because the teachers are only working to contract, which means they're not hosting clubs during lunchtime. They're not writing letters of recommendation, and they aren't participating in any extracurricular activities that they're not getting paid for. And so the students are saying, hey, our teachers, in some cases, are the most trusted people in our lives. We may not have that same support at home, but we have it at school. And now we're unable to interact with them outside of those class times, and they feel really impacted. They are saying they're calling out Hilda Maldonado by name. They're calling out individual cabinet members, and they're saying, you don't care about us. And they're saying, you don't even know who we are. We don't know your names. You don't visit us on campus. There's no community. And so lots of signs, lots of chants, lots of protests. And the Santa Barbara High one was really cool because the cops blocked off the street. So instead of the kids being really long on the sidewalk, they marched up Cannon Perdido. And so it's this massive visual. And so whether you think the teachers should be paid more, or you don't like their negotiation tactics, or whatever side you're on, it's really hard to not be impressed by the teachers. I'm sorry, by the students who are choosing to be activists. It's a lot easier just to stay on campus at your school and not have to deal with that drama. It's courageous, it's brave on their part to be showing this kind of activism. And we're talking about 15, 16, 17, 18-year olds. These are young people still trying to figure out what they want to do. And they're really smart, these speakers. And I think it's bold and super impressive, regardless of what you think of the contract dispute.
Yeah, although I would have to say it's a little less courageous once we discovered that state law that gives them a free pass for participating in political activity.
It was amazing how many students went to dentist appointments during that.
Well, so Gwyn, listen, you have an interesting perspective on this because you were a school board member in Montecito for 8 years, and you also know Hilda Maldonado, have interviewed her and stuff. I mean, I get that the teachers, should be paid more and particularly living in this housing market, but it's a tough thing if you're an administrator or a school board member because there's a finite amount of money. I mean, what's your perspective on this whole situation?
Look, I always think that teachers don't get paid enough. I mean, I think they're responsible for our kids half of their day. And I think our public schools have a lot of things to look at right now, not just the pay of teachers. But I don't blame teachers for demanding more pay. I think a lot is expected of them inside and outside the classroom. And I think that the way we budget our money reflects our values. So I am all in favor of it. I think I understand it. and I'm
Yeah.
rooting for them.
All right.
personally.
And Josh, it looks like there was a little progress made, at least from the statement that was put out by the school district about the agreement on health benefits. Is that true? Is that coming from both sides, or is that just propaganda?
Yeah, there was a school board meeting last night. There was a negotiation on Tuesday, and the school board meeting was jam-packed with teachers and students, and it's really intense in that room because people are pointing at Hilda and they're really angry. And they're Gabe Escobedo, wow, this guy is getting booed, and he's, his heart's in the good place. I know Gabe. It's really hard though for him to be in that position, and he's hearing these people say, he's giving him 90 seconds to talk. And that's so disrespectful, like 90 seconds. And this is after an hour and a half of them talking, so there's a lot of intensity in that room, a lot of rage, a lot of anger. The school district and the teacher association have agreed on benefits. Apparently, no matter what benefit plan you pick, they will pay 75% of it for employee only.
There's a huge, that's a huge increase.
Yeah, that's money in your pocket for sure. And then they've also agreed to keep their class sizes the same, which I'm not totally specific on what that is. I think it's 20-1, but they have not been able to agree on the pay increase. They want a 20% increase. The district, I think, came back with like 9 or something. And so the next negotiation schedule meeting is in January, and they'll figure it out then. I think the teachers are going to come away with this. I mean, the district has no choice. They're going to have to give them just about everything they want because there's this public backlash. So I think everything's headed in a good way for the Teachers Association.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing, Jerry?
Yeah, sure.
No, I just wanted to say, in addition to what I said, I do think school boards and Hilda, they are in a very tough position. And obviously, they know what their budget is and where the money has to go. And lots of places that it goes impacts the students. So I don't mean to suggest that the only thing that impacts the students is teacher pay, but I do think it's an important thing to look at. I think sorry, I'll shut up after this.
No, I was yelling at Henry to shut up.
One of the important things that they think about are this all goes into their pension. This is paid lifelong. Right. So there are lots of considerations. This is not just paying them today. This goes on the books in perpetuity.
But the miscalculation of failing to pay them what they were supposed to pay them in a total amount under Prop 98 was a huge blunder. And that's, I think, affecting everything. Well, speaking of students trusting teachers, Ryan, you had an interesting scoop this week. On top of everything else, now the school board loses a $25 million judgment for a sexual abuse case dating back to 2010, 2011.
Yeah, this happened from 2008 to 2011, and it was a employee of the district. So he wasn't a teacher; he was a campus security official, and he was a freshman football coach. And during that time, a couple of years, he at least 3 different students, sexually abused and groomed them to kind of, he would take them out to eat in his nice classic car and kind of be way too friendly with them. And, this happened over a decade ago. And a lot of people think he got away with a slap on the wrist. He did 1 year and then 5 years probation. He has to be on the registry for life, but a lot of people were not happy with that. So there's been 2 civil cases. This is the second one, and 25 million, a jury awarding 25 million and finding that they found that the district was 80% at fault. And that says a lot, because that says that through this case, it was proven that, the district had known about this guy, Justin Sell. And it's been a lot of warning signs. At one time, he even punched one of the students that he was involved with. He punched the students that he was abusing. He punched him on campus. And, that they kind of brushed it under the rug, that it was an altercation, and it wasn't properly reported to the authorities like it should have been. And the jury found that's a big settlement. So 25 million, and
that goes that's going to the students, or where is it going?
So how it works is, the the student that filed this civil lawsuit, John Doe number 2, he is entitled to 20 million from the district. That's 80% of that. And that it's a large settlement, and it goes to prove that that the district, this happened on their watch. A lot of people were asking, and this is a big question I had too, was is this going to affect this teacher's salary? Because 25 million is a large sum, but of course, they're covered. This is covered in district insurance and all the legal fees, but still, that's a substantial settlement, and a little bit of closure, I think, after the 10 years, but I don't think that ever repays what these kids had to go through.
Well, and Ryan, you're young enough to remember this guy. You were a DP.
I was actually at Dos Pueblos around that time, and it's one of those things when I think you're young, you don't know what you're seeing. You see somebody that is kind of supposed to be trusted, breaking that boundary of friend and mentor. Like somebody is supposed to be your friend or your caretaker is not, or your mentor or your caretaker is not supposed to be your
But
buddy.
did you think it was weird at the time? Did you think the guy?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who played football, and a lot of people did think it was strange, but I think that people that do stuff like this type of grooming, they're looking for vulnerable students and maybe kids that didn't have the best home life, and so maybe we weren't really seeing what was happening at the time, but we had a feeling that there was just something off about an older guy really trying to be buddy with kids that were 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, and we should clarify that. Henry, stop. Jeez. Sorry, I'm at my daughter's house. I'm taking care. Oh, and there's my daughter. How are you? Anyway, we should clarify that Hilda Maldonado was not the superintendent.
Yeah, this was over a decade ago. Previous principals, previous administrations. So it doesn't really.
Cash was this.
Yeah,
Was Dave Cash
was the principal at the
the
time.
superintendent or the principal?
It was
He was the superintendent.
yeah, and I'm
John Becchio, I think, was the.
that sounds more familiar, and
I thought
so it doesn't.
Becchio came from Santa Barbara. What wasn't Sean Carey? Well, never mind. We shouldn't speculate.
No, it
Oh,
wasn't
I'm sorry.
Becchio.
I think
You're
it was long
absolutely right.
enough
Becchio was at Santa Barbara. You're
Yeah,
right.
long enough to not really reflect on this current district and administration, but it shows that it's still this is not anything really new in schools, and it's just you have to be really careful with who you're hiring, and I think this is a come to Jesus moment that the district really needs to pay attention to.
Well, and Gwyn, as you recall, the Matt Academy scandal of just a couple of years ago, it was sort of the same thing going on.
Well,
All
it's
right.
also for kids, it's like such a weird thing. It's not just vulnerable kids. It's like that feeling when you're young that someone of power is taking an interest in you. And I think, at first that can be really flattering. It feels like you're special. And I think these kids are so young and impressionable and, feel somewhat responsible. It's like a weird thing that goes on during these grooming incidents. And anyway.
All right. Well, fellas, I know you want to join me in congratulating Gwyn for her selection as Woman of the Year for the Dem Women. And what was most interesting about it was not the award itself, but the speech that you gave, which was really widely commented upon and is posted. I think is it on your website? Okay, yeah, people want to. It's really worth a listen. But I wanted to ask you actually about another piece that you wrote, I think last week, about this whole controversy about the ring nets being removed that had been installed on creeks above Montecito to catch debris after the debris flow. It was a huge deal to raise the money. It was privately raised and installed and so on. And then the county decided not to help keep them, so they were removed. And you really took out both after the county and the district supervisor, Das Williams, about that. First of all, what do you think he should have done? And second of all, is that going to be do you think it's a voting issue for people in that district? And, kind of how does it shape that whole race? Das is going for re-election.
Das has a big, vast district, even more so now than he used to. So I don't know how it impacts the outcome of the race. I think it absolutely impacts the way many people in Montecito feel, not all. What should DOS have done? I think, honestly, the feeling all the way along was that if we got this done in the first place, it was despite DOS, not because of DOS. And there was never a feeling like he was on the team trying to help us figure something out, especially if it's not something he was personally getting credit for, like Randall Road debris basin or something like that. And I am just so tired of that kind of self-serving leadership. I know that's a very harsh thing to say, and I'm not suggesting that he doesn't mean well, but we did not feel supported in this effort.
Well, no, and I think if people read your piece, I mean, it was pretty, your emotions were pretty raw about it. I mean, after all that everybody went through,
right,
beginning with the disaster itself, obviously, but.
Well, to answer your question more directly, what I would have wanted him to do is to recognize with us the timing of needing to really explore whether this was worth the county taking over, and giving it the time and respect that this issue and concern that this issue deserves, because there isn't a silver bullet to protecting Santa Barbara in general from debris flow. We live below the Santa Ynez Mountains. It's very dangerous. And it's really easy, as Mike Mazinga pointed out. Is it Joe Mazinga or Mike Mazinga?
Joe
Joe
Mazinga.
Mazinga from the LA Times in his piece that he wrote back in 2018, that people have the attention span of ants. So we tend to think, because it stops raining there, or it rains once, there's no more drought, or because, people in the last couple of years have lived in a pretty beautiful environment without a lot of, and then in January, there was a big scare again.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is the group, I'm going to butcher the name, the Committee for Resilience or whatever it was. I mean, I think that what the really incredible thing was commissioning that study of the history of such incidents. And it's not a 1 in 500 year event, as we were told at the time. It's about every 40 years. And it just seemed that the county was kind of poo-pooing this whole remediation attempt. And as you say, having a very short memory. I mean, this is going to happen again.
Well, it's not only going to happen again, but I just want to be clear on one technical aspect of the nets. I know that for the county, it would have been easier to support if there had been easy road access to cleaning out the nets with trucks. The problem is the nets are very high up on the mountain, and so they have to be cleaned out with helicopters, and so it becomes expensive. The reason they're high up was not to make them hard to reach. The reason they're high up is because debris basins are great, but what you want to do is also catch the debris very high up so that the boulders don't become a part of it and the velocity is slowed down. Because once it gets down to the basins, it's almost too late. Nothing is going to stop a 30-foot high debris basin, which is then going to jump the boundaries of the basin and create dams that then break. I mean, this has been going on for centuries. And you're right, Jerry, it is sometimes every 20 years, not just 40 years. And so the idea that anyone ever said, Ed Keller or anyone ever said 1,000-year event, or people were asking the question, how much debris is still up on the mountains? The mountain is debris. It's not bedrock. So there's 100% of debris up on the mountain. The mountain naturally wants to make its way to the ocean, which is why we have beautiful boulders in our yards and on paths. So it really does need to be dealt with. And my objection is that it was dealt with too late. The can was kicked down the road, and by the time DOS began to say, no, I really do want the Buena Vista net, or the nets were down, they were on the ground.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Josh, as you know, those boulders are coming down 32 feet per second, the law of physics. But that aside, Das is running for reelection.
Are you math shaming me, Jerry?
Against Roy Lee, a member of the Carpinteria City Council, but a more competitive race appears to be shaping up in the 3rd district, where Joan Hartman is running for reelection, and there was a new kind of last-minute entrant into that one, so it's really sort of scrambled the political calculus there. What's the landscape look like, Josh?
Well, Janelle Osborne, Lompoc mayor, jumped into the race like a week before the deadline, and this really impacted, shock, surprise, Darcel, the Dem Party, because they weren't counting on that.
Darcel Elliott, the chief of staff to Das Williams,
And the chair of the Democratic Party, yes. And so they were surprised because they thought Janelle was sort of a friendly ally, not somebody who was going to disrupt their plan. As we know, the Democrats like to clear the field, get rid of every potential challenger to whoever is the chosen one in that moment. And so, they've got a plan for Joan. They've got a plan for Joan's successor. There are plans for who the party would like to see based on individual personalities, not really based on what's best for voters. And, that's why Greg Hart's in the assembly, because, years ago, he was not the chosen, and then they paid him back, and he's the chosen guy in the assembly now. So Janelle gets in, she sort of shuffles everything, because you've got Joan Hartman seeking another term, running against Frank Troyce, who's a Republican with a ton of money, but no name, and
but
not really
it's a new district for Joan. She lost IV, which is a big deal.
She lost IV. So that in itself, right, is going to make it interesting. Troyce is not unifying the Republicans. So there's some effort to get Janelle in. Janelle is no party preference. She is, at least in my interview with her, described herself as moderate, middle of the road. She cares about farmers. She cares about ag. She cares about alternative energies, not just moving toward, green energy, but maybe looking at nuclear energy, oil, a diverse platform. And she is also somebody who says, I vote based off of the idea and what's best for everybody, not based on party. And so this is Lompoc, right? So Lompoc has been ignored, neglected. That you cannot deny that by the Board of Supervisors.
Or what Salud Carbajal famously referred to as the armpit of
No,
Santa.
no. That was Ventura, I believe.
No, that was Lompoc.
Oh, was it? Okay,
Yeah,
okay, sorry.
take it to the bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Janelle's going to bring a little bit of energy to the race from mid-county. Joan Hartman's been doing a lot more in Lompoc in the last year because of the redistricting. So there's all sorts of scenarios. Some people say that this is going to hurt Frank more than it hurts Joan. Some people say it will hurt Joan. And who's going to make it to the runoff in
Makes
November?
it much more likely there'll be a runoff, right? Top two, nobody will get 50% in March.
Yeah. So, but Janelle's got some work to do on the South Coast. She needs to hire a consultant. She needs to get her name out there. She's a member of SBCAG, Santa Barbara County Association of Government. She was the board president. Just like Roy Lee, you can't run because you think you're a good person. You have to run because you want to win, which means you've got to swing for the knockout. You've got to leave
raise
all
first of all
on the field. You cannot run a half-ass campaign, and you got to spend a lot of money, and that's the only way. That's why Das Williams has been in office. Not a good public servant,
2002,
but the best campaigner you're ever going to find, right? And that's what you have to do. It's two different worlds.
Well, I think there are some people stepping up for Roy Lee. I got to tell you, I think some people are.
well, that's what I wondered about the Nets, whether there weren't, people who donate to political campaigns who may have supported Das in the past who are not entirely happy with him. So we'll find out. All right. Hey, Ryan, you've been covering the tenant protections legislation moving ahead in the city. I guess it finally got out of ordinance committee this week. So what did they end up with?
Yeah, so the polished version is through ordinance committee, and it's going to go to city council. And it's a lot more than I thought would get through. This is something that, you know, when I first started covering the city, maybe 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, these talks would have gone a different way. They wouldn't have got as much support, like for the two big things in these protections that we already have an eviction ordinance, but this would protect people that are, you know, for rent evictions, which is a big thing, where landlords will say, we're going to renovate this property, you have to leave, and you know, they'll rent it out to the next person for market rate. So now what this new protections would do is make it so that those tenants that were displaced would have the first right to refuse, or first right to rent that unit afterwards. And that would be at a maximum 10% of raising that rent, which would be a huge.
So they could do, so the landlords could do the renovations, they can evict them, but they have to offer the place back to the tenant.
Back to the same
at
tenant.
at a rent that's no more than 10%. What do the realtors say about that?
So the realtors, of course, are they were not happy. You know, this is going to cut into their profits, which, you know, to their point, you know, it's a lot more expensive to do renovations and to do any sort of work nowadays. But I think Kristen Sneddon, she's on the ordinance committee, made a really good point that, you know, the rents being what they are nowadays, like $2,600 for 1 bedroom, $4,000 and higher for 2-3 bedrooms. If you're a landlord and you can't really make your renovations and make your fixes and do maintenance with those prices, then, you know, we don't know what to do. And I think this is going to go to city council, and it might get a few changes. You know, there's some things in there. Mike Jordan actually added something called a cooling down period, a cooling off period, which was a big surprise, not coming from him, but that it's coming forward to city council, that, you know, they're going to consider, if you buy more than 5 units, you have to wait at least a year before you kick people out, before you renovate or demolish a property substantially. And that would, you know, be a huge change, because we've seen a lot of full apartment buildings get purchased, and, you know, in 6 months or less, you know, 60 days, they give you a notice, they'll kick everybody out and say, we have to renovate, we're going to make this a luxury apartment. So
Yeah, one of the most interesting
things
in your piece, I found to be the comments by Frank Rodriguez from Cause, who's, you know, never been all that happy with City Hall, but he was kind of glowing in his praise about how.
Well, that's, yeah, it's, you know, I was expecting it to get picked apart even by ordinance committee. You know, Kristen Sneddon and Oscar are generally, you know, supportive of housing and tenants. And I think Mike Jordan gets a bad rap for not supporting tenants, but you saw the Bass Street that was right in his,
he was all over
district, and he jumped at that. And I think, you know, him asking questions is more him being inquisitive about it. And he was very supportive. And him adding this cooling off period kind of shows the change of, and that they're really paying attention, and might be, it's an election year, and to be on the side of the tenants during an election year is, you know, really important.
How many minutes did he talk, Josh? Was it 32?
That was 32 the last week. This week
32 minutes. Yes. And I was only there for an hour. So yeah, it really bothered me.
Yeah, so it's 2-hour max meeting. But it is going to go forward to city council, where it'll get a little bit deeper discussion. You know, it's going to have to get a couple more votes. I'm sure it's going to get a little bit of changes to it, or recommended changes. So we're going to see, but it good sign for the tenants who, another big thing was the harassment, which is something that they're seeing when you're being evicted. Landlords will kind of send a notice and either be very vague or outright false with saying, you know, we have a right to do this, or you're not covered under the Tenant Protection Act. And tenants don't really know housing law. Fortunately, covering this, I've become an unintended expert on housing law, because there's so many different things, the Coastal Act, the Tenant Protection Act, the Housing Accountability Act, and how they all interact. But to see this is kind of encouraging for tenants.
All right. Hey, Gwyn, I should know the answer to this, but I don't. And you've probably told me this 32 times and I've just forgotten. But so part of Montecito comes under the city of Santa Barbara. Part of it does not. So does that mean that if they pass this Tenant Protection Act, it would apply to only part of the land, or a fraction of the landlords in Montecito, but the rest would be under county jurisdiction, and it would not?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, and it's mostly along Coast Village Road and
Okay. All right.
We are seeing, you know, the county kind of walk in step with what the city has done in the tenant protections this last round. And we've seen these similar rent evictions and harassment happening in the county. So I wouldn't be surprised if these get passed in the city, that the county does something similar like they did with the last round.
You know, Gwyn, unless I miss my guess, I'm looking at the editor-in-chief of Riv magazine photobombing you right now behind.
Hey, Les,
No, it's
want to make an appearance on the Jerry Roberts show?
he's
There was a star sighting. They saw the editor of the Riv magazine. So
it
you can
is
check
it's the very one. How you doing, Les?
Hi, people. How are you doing?
No, we're living the dream. We were just talking about the ring nets, which I know you had a major part in researching. So anyway, all right, we got to get out of here. Gwyn's speech, I think the text and the recording are on the website along with my piece. We should point out.
I believe it's entitled "I Have a Dream."
Oh yes, okay, there you go. Josh, who you got? Who you got on the podcast?
Well, I'm still in the process of booking that because I've been very busy all week, but I'm gonna book Austin Herlihy, the commercial real estate broker, who's got a housing, because actually Ryan brought up Kristen Snedden's comments and it really pissed off a lot of property owners.
That the 10% should be plenty.
No, the fact that the landlord should have enough money to make these renovations. And so like the other side is they're thinking like, this is a council member who does not understand the economics of actually owning and managing a property. And so I might talk, I'm going to book him. I'm also trying to get Janelle Osborne on the show to talk about her campaign. So these things are still in the works and haven't finalized anything since we're a little early today, Jerry.
Yeah, we are. We're recording it. Did I say it was Friday? It's Thursday, December.
Thursday.
Gary, can I ask Ryan one quick question?
I
Ryan,
think
was
so,
it-
yeah.
Ryan, was it ever figured out if there was any deal made with Carpinteria to have less housing there versus all the housing in Goleta? And what's the deal with that?
So during the county discussion, there was a interesting exchange between the supervisors and Alan Bell, who was one of the planners, and lower caps asked that question, and because there's this presentation that was floating around, and I was actually sent this too early on in the process, where the county, and it has a county Santa Barbara in the corner. During presentation, it says kind of a vague line where
cannabis is exempt.
Agricultural, cannabis is outside Carpinteria. Agricultural lands are exempt. It just says because of cannabis. Now, when it was brought up during the meeting, Ellen Bell, kind of stood on firm ground and said, "We never said this."
Baloney.
And Laura Capps had the same screenshot that I was speaking of, and she said, she didn't want to push it further because she was already voting against it, and so she said, I have this here, but so it's kind of up in the air, and they did that. I think we spoke about it last week, where they reached out to the property owners themselves, and that they're doing well and making money, and
Didn't
they
they
don't
say
want
it had to do with like existing leases or something like that?
there's a lot of different things thrown out there. It's really kind of gray area. As far as the county's final stance was that we spoke to the property owners, and it wasn't feasible, or it wasn't possible. They weren't interested.
Yeah, and it's a good issue though, Gwyn, because there is a lot of questions about it. When I spoke to Roy Lee recently, he's concerned that there's still too much new housing being cited.
Yeah, Carpinteria. So I also, covering for Coastal View News, I cover sports over there, and then Planning Commission, I do a lot, and they are very hesitant with they're very slow growth. They want to protect the small beach town character, and any projects that have more than 20 units, 30 units, more than that, they really get some pushback, especially when it comes to parking. Carpinterians don't want lots of cars or traffic, and so this is going to be over the next 8 years, when these units come in or don't come in, we're going to see a lot more.
Yeah, but that political stance is not going to fly in the race for the first district supervisor. I mean, the train has left the station on the housing thing.
Yeah, the California does need housing, and there's no I don't think there's any stopping that at this point.
And
What'd
what
you think,
about
Gwyn?
Goleta? I mean, that's a lot. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
Goleta is a lot, and the county stance on that is that's close enough to infrastructure where they can kind of make it happen. And it's close enough to transit, it's close enough to stores and everything, where when you start getting out in Gaviota, when you start getting farther than Carpinteria, you're a
What
little
about
outside
water?
of the urban sprawl. But that's the stance on it. So there's a lot of questions.
Except for the Glen Annie Golf Club, I just want to say, that is not near
That is not
transit.
east of
That is
the-
not near infrastructure. That is basically, rural ag area with no, only one way in. So
Yeah, and anybody who's picked up a student over there or dropped off a student at 8 o'clock or 3
Right.
o'clock PM, I couldn't imagine trying to get to your house.
Got traffic,
Yes.
water. I mean, there are so many.
And as Josh pointed out last week when we discussed this issue, that the county housing element, and as I headlined, actually, the fix was in between Das and Lisa Plowman about where this was going to go. And Laura, came in after it was all cited over there in the second district. So that's why she voted against it, as I understand. All right, Gwyn, Lurie, Josh Molina, Ryan P. Cruz, thank you so much. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week with a new edition of Newsmakers TV.